All right, there we go. I think we're live. Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Rethinking Legal Ops, where we have forward-thinking conversations about the many ways law and technology are integrating to change the way we look and practice law. I'm your host, Aishwarya, Head of Legal at Speed Legal, and today we have an amazing guest with us, Kevin Keller. He has a lot of experience as a general counsel and is also a tech enthusiast. He's had a very interesting professional journey supporting startups and also just innovating along the way. Amazing to have you here with us, Kevin. And Kevin is right now the general counsel for Snapcommerce.
Thank you very much.
And just to begin with, Kevin, when I saw your profile, I just became super curious about everything you've done, because you have literally done a little bit of everything. So just to kick things off, please tell us a little bit about your professional and academic journey as to how you ended up where you are.
Yeah, when you describe me as a long-term general counsel, I've actually not had the title general counsel for very long, about 4 or 5 months, and so the title. But I have done things generally across the practice of law for quite some time. I followed a somewhat traditional path of going from law school to a big law firm, Wilson Sonsini. But there I represented a lot of different startups, some kind of name brands everyone would recognize, like Napster, before they got shut down by the music industry. And had they not been, they probably would have been the early Spotify 15 years before Spotify ever occurred. But the music industry was mad, had to have their pound of flesh, and they were gone. So companies like that, but also bigger companies and companies in different spaces like the semiconductor industry, like Broadcom, and that led to some in-house roles doing work with semiconductors at Micron, and then again at Microsoft, being responsible for custom silicon for things like the Xbox and for the Zune, which is a great product, but a little too late to market, be successful. We also been at Amazon and other places, very big places like that, but in smaller roles where I supported smaller parts of the business, always kind of in that sort of startup new product space, even within those bigger companies, including where I am now, Snapcommerce, where we've got 2 different operating verticals, travel booking business and an e-commerce business. And we'll be launching some fintech products pretty soon that I've been working on. So that's a real quick rundown of what I've been up to.
That is all very exciting. And I know that you also have a technical background. You're also an engineer. How much of your tech background do you think has helped you in all of these diverse roles that you've held?
I think it helps in making kind of connections with engineering teams and understanding what they're doing and maybe how challenging the things that they're trying to accomplish are. I think when I started at Wilson Sonsini, I was in the technology transactions group there, and it was split about 50-50 between those of us with technical backgrounds and those of us without. I think the main factor, at least looking back, in whether somebody was successful or not was not that. It wasn't whether you had a technical background or not. It was how interested and how much you dove into the client's products and tried to understand them and how they work so that you could get their agreements and everything right. And so it's factored in. I can speak the lingo, and it gets me up to speed a little bit faster. But I also have to remember that even when I graduated with a technical degree, it was probably outdated from a real engineering standpoint. And I'm always trying to be cautious to not think that I know what the engineering is, because my engineering knowledge is somewhat dated at this point. So it's useful for the terminology. It's useful as background, but it's not the distinguishing factor in whether or not somebody can be successful or not.
Yeah, perfect. And also, I think that the evolving role of the general counsel as we see it today is a little bit of that of a legal solutions engineer, right? So do you think some of the skills you picked up while you were studying engineering, and then like integrating that with the way you maybe advise your company or create solutions for them, do you see some sort of like spillover between your 2 sets of knowledge there?
Yeah, I think having some different background, whether it's engineering or something else, gives you a different perspective, a different way of looking at problems. So in my case, I probably bring that engineering solution, to bear when I'm trying to solve a legal problem, for example. And one of the things I've listed on my LinkedIn are the patents that I'm actually an inventor on. And for those, a lot of those were me being presented with a legal problem that would have required kind of a janky, not a customer friendly solution, and thinking, wait a second, there might be an engineering solution here that gets us around the legal problem. So whether it was at the time when you couldn't have any device on when you took off from an airplane, and we wanted to say, hey, is there a way that the Kindle, which doesn't, which is a pretty innocuous device, could still be on while you're taking off and landing, instead of being one of the things you had to put in your bag while you took off or you landed. Is there a way we can make that happen? And we pushed on the legislative front to try to get some changes to the law, but at the same time we thought, and I thought, and we got a patent on the idea of recognizing the unique radio frequencies that might be around an airport, and then doing some actions in the device to make sure that there was no way that it could ever be on and transmitting, and therefore it could be an exception to those laws. So sometimes your different background, whatever it might be, can play into coming to a different or an alternate solution to a legal problem. And so I would say the engineering helps with that, but it could be you're an art major and you found a different way to like present a warning label that's actually creative and funny and appealing to customers, while at the same time accomplishing the legal ends. So to always use your additional skills to think outside of the box.
Totally. That really resonates with me. And speaking of thinking a bit outside the box and also integrating, other ththings into the way you practice law, are there any tech trends in the legal industry that you're most excited about right now?
I think this podcast or this streaming is all about legal operations and the technology. I think the operas. I'm gonna try to make up a word, or maybe it is a word. The operational operationalizing it's probably the easiest way to say it. The legal processes is probably the trend that's the most interesting to me. There are so many things in a legal department that you do again and again and again. They're repeatable, and they might have slight variations, but to just keep on doing them or throw more legal resources or more attorneys at something just because now we've got 2x of it and it repeats 2x times, so now we need 2 attorneys, is not the right answer. The right answer is, how is it similar, and how could we put a process in place that makes it so that that one attorney can do 4x or 10x
Yeah.
the amount, that they can just focus on the deviations from the norm. And that trend of trying to find those solutions and streamline legal is one that's really, really interesting. It has, in some ways, shrunk the pool of, I don't need to throw another attorney at it, so therefore I don't need another attorney to be hired to my group. But it has increased the scope of the roles out there for legal professionals or even attorneys who want to shift and be in the operational side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most interesting things that have come out of it is also this sort of new way of thinking about, how lawyers advise their clients, right? Like lawyers are now being seen as more like business partners rather than, like the naysayers or people that just like quash your ideas and like tell you can't do that. It's different now. So I really like that. And then just going on LinkedIn and seeing all these lawyers pursuing, like some of them are becoming now career coaches. Some of them are, going more into like legal ops rather than, just being a GC or practicing at a
Yeah.
law firm. So it's really expanded the scope of what being a lawyer means, which I'm personally, most excited about.
Yeah.
And Kevin, what areas of law practice or your work as a GC do you think tech can be most helpful in?
Uh, Certainly the repeatable things. We all have kind of those agreements, if you will, whether it's NDAs that we all have, or if you're an enterprise to enterprise, a business to business company, you probably have a lot of sales agreements, things that are repeatable that you can through a process of figuring out what's the same in all the deals, what deviates, what fallbacks could be, streamline that, and actually let the business run that whole process. And with just having to come to legal for variations or extreme, things that change or that they need to bring to you, and by that kind of help things run a lot smoother and a lot faster. I think on the compliance side, rather than spreadsheets and rather than somebody's file in a drawer, which when I first started at Amazon was how we were tracking some things. When that person's out, like, where's the file, right? And so finding ways to track, whether it's for compliance purposes, trainings that you're doing, and making sure that everyone in the organization's gotten um, the HR trainings they need or the trainings they need to be compliant with some fintech regulations, then that's really useful to have tools to be able to do that. And also there is, a trend, and it's been going for quite some time. And, businesses, are tracking OKRs, goals, essentially, on the business side. And, having these types of things allows you to track metrics and actually show how the legal departments are improving over time, whether it's like, we've handled this many contracts, this is how many fallbacks, this is the mean time to completion for contracts for us, this is how many trainings we've done. And you're able to actually set goals and track them and all of that in a meaningful way. And I know to some attorneys that sounds like, oh wait, I'm having to report back what I'm doing. Yeah, of course, you're part of the business. You're a cost to the business, and reporting back metrics and setting goals and everything is super important. So I think legal tech can be used to help in those areas as well.
Yeah. And that's a very pertinent point that you bring up about, just being able to track goals and, the expenses. And as a GC, when you think of your own legal expenses, how important it is to curtail them or to, have more efficiency as to where you're spending your legal expenses budget. And where do you think, you've already kind of answered this, but what specific tools maybe in your department or that you can envision for a GC to use in order to cut down their legal expenses?
Yeah, I think on legal expenses, I mean, first you got to know what they are, right? And so, you come in and you're a new GC, you got to, where have we spent? And it may be that at that point, everyone in the organization, they're operating as efficiently and as fast as they can, which might mean that there are multiple contacts throughout the organization that have used outside counsel for their specific needs, but no centralized view of how much is being spent and what it's being spent on. And so, part of it is gathering that together and then starting to break that down into what are the buckets that we're spending on, what is the most spend, what is our trend over time. And that not only helps you look at it and say, how can I be more thoughtful about where I use outside counsel and how much I use outside counsel, but where's the place we spend the most and where would make the most sense to bring a resource inside or create a self-help tool or some consolidated advice, so that before people or even the legal team goes and reaches to outside counsel for advice, they've first done their homework and they've looked at the resources and the results you already have. You may come into an organization, find there are lots of legal opinions floating around, lots of answers to questions already been asked, and how do you not ask the same question and pay for it a second time? So first get your arms around it, and then once then use that as a way to think about how you organize your legal department, how you think about what the next hire should be.
Yep, totally. And especially extremely important with the way the current economy is to curtail any unnecessary expenses. And I think tech has, I agree with you, has a big role in first helping them find out, where you're losing money, what your expenses are, and then, managing them more efficiently. And, speaking of more data insights and data-driven, advice that lawyers can give to their clients, how important do you think it is for a GC or just any lawyer anywhere, even working in a law firm, to be able to fully leverage those data insights that they can get from contracts, rather than just looking at the wording of the law and basing their advice off of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can use it in lots of different ways, and it can be. I mean, it's all like for me, like ultimately, the goal is to be as efficient as possible, and be able to provide advice as quickly as possible, actionable advice and good advice, and alternate and out of the box solutions that might help the team accomplish an end. And the the less of the everyday repeatable things that people are doing, the more you can focus on the strategic, and the more you can focus your team on engaging early with the business teams as they think up ideas, so that if you have those creative solutions, they're not coming in at the last moment when implementing them comes at an engineering cost that they can't be borne, or without the time. And so I think that's another thing that attorneys in general in-house, definitely keep in mind. I think law firm attorneys who've had quite a bit of experience also have this in mind, that there is a cost to implementing legal advice. There's a time and engineering cost to implementing changes, and their best time to catch all that and to try to build it into the overall product is early. And so if you can free up your people's time by using the right tools, then that can get them able to look at the earliest Figma drawings of the user flow and get comments in before it has to be a last minute change and push off the launch, which no one wants to do. If
Yeah.
you're in house, so you're at a company, and this as a founder, you want to get the products out there to your customers, and anything that delays that is not great. So you never want to be the delay. You want to get ahead of it and help the company be ahead of it.
Exactly. Being ahead of it, I think, like, like the key words there. Totally agree with that. And also just, thinking about this from a non-lawyer perspective, how important do you think it is to also empower non-lawyer team members, like, members in the finance or the sales team, to be able to understand their contracts a little bit better without having to forward every question, to legal, which also creates its own bottlenecks.
Yeah, I always tell people, I mean, and I didn't study it, so I don't know for sure, but I don't think law is rocket science. I don't think it's that complex. I think we should be able to be translators and explain things to people in as straightforward terms as possible and as clear and concise. And that includes, like, in contracts, like breaking down what this clause means. What I found in, over my career, and this is a really great insight for teams that work together, is that person who has been doing supply chain agreements, and doing operations for their whole career from the business side, they understand, disclaimers of warranty and warranties, indemnity. They understand how valuable they can be because they've lived through, an uh-oh moment where something's gone wrong and you've had to go back to the contract, and they've lived through enough of that they understand it, because of those moments. But people who are new to it maybe know. And so if you can explain it in as succinct and as clear a way as possible, then it helps to put a business value on how important those things are. And once you can assign a business value, you can decide how much time should I spend on this. And you're enabled as a business person to make a decision about whether this is okay in this context or not without consulting legal.
Yeah.
Frankly, I mean, there are people who've done this, and done contracts and things for a large part of their career that aren't attorneys, that aren't legally trained, but know them as good as, any attorney does, especially a new attorney. And so I think that's always something good to keep in mind. And when you go to negotiate, knowing that about your counterpart, if they've been at it for a while, you can really play against each other really, really well. And act surprised about a business clause. They can act surprised about a legal clause, really knowing and setting you up to deliver to the other side, and be successful in the negotiation. So that training, that enabling the business team to operate without you, I think you have to be able to do that. That's a core skill for attorneys.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of just contract negotiations in general, uh, do you think the way we're negotiating contracts today in 2022, is that like satisfactory? Is there room for change, and where do you see tech being integrated into that?
I think there's always room for change and refinement. I have been at some of the I some of the most innovative companies I think out there. Amazon is really, they Jeff reportedly, initially wanted to name the company Relentless, and that's what they are. They will hone a process and improve it and improve it and improve it, and that also applies to contracts. And on the AWS side, they've operationalized contracts to the point where the business can generate the contract, the business can generate the fallbacks if they need them. They get routed for the right approvals if it needs it, and you can track which approvals and which fallbacks you've used. It's all automated to the point where it becomes really easy to do a back and forth with the other side and to negotiate a contract without including legal whatsoever. Route it to DocuSign once it's all done, get it signed, get it sent in a repository, saved and OCR or tracked and everything, and with deadlines and with termination dates and everything automatically notifying people. And so I think that's like the far end. I very impressed. I was not on that side of the house, but I was always super impressed by the work that they did there to continually improve that process. And I think any company that has, especially if you have a lot of repeatable stuff like that on the business side, you really can accomplish a lot and cut your costs a lot by adopting the technology. They built their stuff in house, but there are lots of outside solutions now that can be tailored for your needs. So
yeah, absolutely. And like, cutting down expenses, making life and, just practicing law at least a little bit easier, if not significantly. Although I think it can be significant with, like the right, like legal tech toolkit. Just also now I'm going to transition to asking you for a potentially controversial opinion about this topic. I often ask, like lawyers with a lot of experience. So how do you really feel about redlining in the way that we're sharing like versions of documents and the way we edit them like between different teams, or also with business counterparts?
I will say it's kind of related to redlining that the practice I'm still getting used to, and this may be a factor of when I came out of school, my age, the practices of redlining and everything, but it's very difficult for me collaboratively working in, say, a Google document where things change, and unless you're like tracking the change log all the time, somebody comes in and edits and you don't know. And for me, like, a lot of the drafting I did when I first started as a tech transactions attorney, it wasn't joint drafting unless it was a really massive agreement. But then even then it was broken into discrete segments that one person would work on versus another person. And you kind of had the inputs from the other side. You knew which definitions you needed to use and all this. And then you made sure that this one thing was internally consistent. So the OCD sort of part of me gets a little worried that when I've tailored something and I've made sure everything is internally consistent, but it could change out from under me because someone has access to it. It's a little troublesome. But when you're drafting internal communications, or you're drafting PR or other things, it can be super helpful, especially if people use the tool in the right way, using the suggestions, using comments, so I can see what you did and I can see why you did it. It's actually a great learning tool if you're using it that way. One of the challenges that I think that law firm associates, at least when I was at the law firm, faced was that they would mark up a document, redline a document for a client with the changes that it needed, and then partner would review it and completely change it and completely mark it up a different way, send it, and they wouldn't have a lot of time. They just send it to the other side and say, here, I sent it over. And as an associate, you're left like, why? And then I had friends who would bring around a document and say, I can't understand why the partner made this change, and none of us could. It was like, well, it's functionally, it seems the same. I don't know why they did that. So some of it was stylistic, but it caused a lot of anxiety, an associate to not know why and then not actually get trained in why this choice of words and why this way that it was structured. So I think that the newer, more collaborative way of drafting anything, if you use it right, can be used as a great training tool for new attorneys, for paralegals, contract managers, legal professionals, to actually make a change and then make a comment about why in the document. It takes just a little bit more time, but now you educated not just yourself, not just actually said the reason why and made sure that it's in your mind, you're thinking through it the right way. So it's a good step for yourself, but it's also a good training tool. So I think that I'm not a big fan of red lines. I'm not a big fan of people who lock a document after they've made and accepted red lines and send it over to you and act as if, you know, that's like bad form, and that does happen. Then you just have to OCR it, break it apart, you know, do a red line and send it back to them, and you know, there's some bad behavior there. But I do think that some of the more collaborative, newer tools like Google Docs and everything, if used right, are a great training tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sort of see like, both of those perspectives, because I personally, I do like redlining as well, because I think that's just how I was trained at law school to, to edit documents when I sent over stuff to my professors, or when, we worked on projects. That's just what we did. But yeah, I have been that like intern, or, that like junior attorney that's like confused, like puzzled, like why was this change made? And so I do appreciate some of those new like tech tools that allow for that real-time editing, while also doing like, version control and making sure, people are not tweaking things a little too much. But speaking of education and training for attorneys, how do you think that the way we teach law in law schools at the moment, how does that need to evolve to fit this new type of like this like business, like this like
Yeah.
technology and like legal role of the future lawyer?
A friend and I have been pitching for years to my alma mater, NYU Law, a practical course in contracting, and I even have a syllabus. I have the slide decks and everything. It's mostly meme based, yeah, it's, and kind of examples that are fun and funny, and you can play with. I think that. The collaborative piece of and practical education is something that's missing in law schools. Some programs do have like a lawyering program, but those usually focus around litigation, and even in litigation they're not really focused around um, you know they're maybe focused on litigation on in areas that aren't necessarily something that everyone is going to practice. So I think it could be really helpful to do a course, a lawyering course, where it's practical, where you're in that quarter or semester gating about a contract, and you have a real contract, and you have a lot of back and forth about what the words mean and why, and go into all the sort of things that you do in house when you're trying to break down, is there a problem here, is there a challenge? So but there's not any of that, and so that would be good to have a little more of that. The other thing that's completely missing, that I would advocate, I've been very active on Twitter whenever law professors say, what should we add to the curriculum? Or deans say, what should we add to the curriculum? I see that, I always respond, a management course. Lawyers get no management training whatsoever. And then we graduate, and eventually, whether it's legal professionals or other attorneys, we end up managing them. And the only experience we have is being managed by other attorneys who weren't trained themselves, and who, a lot of cases, are really, really poor managers, and really to poor to the point of being really horrible. And so then all you can learn is like, I want to do the opposite of that, but that's not necessarily good management. It's just not being bad.
Yeah.
So having some management training in law school, I think, would be incredibly valuable. Teaching newer attorneys about goal setting, and just doing practical classes like that would be super, super helpful. We all know, like, you don't really, in the current law schools, at least in the United States, you don't really learn how to practice law at all. You learn some black letter law, some theory, and that's about it. And the first time you actually learn like what the real law might be at the moment is when you study for a bar.
Yeah.
And you study this wide breadth of things, most of which you won't again use in your career. And you memorize a lot, and you regurgitate on a bar. So that's not really helpful, not really useful. But the practical skill stuff, then you start on day one. You don't know how to write a contract. I
Yeah.
remember getting asked to do a website development agreement. It was the first thing I got asked to draft, and I had no clue at whatsoever where to start, what it needed to have in it. no idea what went in the contract. And so those practical skills would be super useful.
Absolutely. I cannot agree with that more. I have been in like, those types of situations as well, where I've been asked to draft a document and I'm just like, I've seen it in my like legal writing class, but I don't know how to really do it from scratch. I can use a template, but the other thing when you were talking about sort of like practical training classes, it reminded me of a class that I attended in Berkeley. It was called International Business Transactions, and it was taught by these two DLA Piper attorneys. And it was taught between Berkeley Law and then Stanford Law. And then we would go to DLA's offices to negotiate a contract. And we were, representing two different parties. And they also integrated some MBA students into the team. So it was also like non-lawyers.
Useful.
And very, very useful. And so from simulating the entire negotiation experience, of course, it was, negotiation on training wheels, because we had these two expert attorneys telling us, what to do along the way, to like, popping the champagne when the negotiation is done. It was such an incredible experience. And the most important thing I learned during that class is how to communicate with non-lawyer team members, and not use as much legalese, because in the first year, second year of law school, you're just taught that. I don't think it's like taught, it's more just a culture. Like, and you're also, I guess I was very excited to learn all these like new jargon, like just like throwing it around. But then I did realize that, not all legalese, especially when you're talking to non-lawyer team members, is very useful and similar for contracts.
Yeah, I'm going to say the quote wrong, but I think it was Mark Twain that said, I'd have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have enough time. It is a challenge to write something succinctly. And I think maybe, a little bit of, hey, answer this in 3 sentences or less. Now, when I was my very first grade that I got in law school, I was brokenhearted when I got it. I walked home from school, and it was a cold winter day, I remember. And I stopped at a peanut vendor, one of those nut vendors in New York, and I got some nuts, and I ate my feelings on the way home because I got a B- in contracts. And it just killed me because I thought I really understood it. And the professor, Barry Adler, if you're listening, Barry, you broke my heart. But Barry's questions on his test were very different than the way you'd prep to take a law school test. It wasn't an essay. He asked questions, and then he made you do it in answer in 50 words or less, count your words. And then his full essay was like 300 words for the biggest one, count your words and write down your word count. And so the challenge of having to like answer a question succinctly, I think just threw me. And second semester B+, and then I think it just was a thorn in my side. So I took advanced sales and contracting my third year and got an A. So, and now I've negotiated and drafted contracts most of my career. So it was maybe Barry also spurred me on with that. But it's something that was super useful, and that you'll find, especially in house. When I first started Amazon, this dates when I started. Everyone still had Blackberries, and the general rule of thumb is if you're answering a question from Steve Kessel, who was the VP of the Kindle organization, or the SVP of the Kindle organization, or from Jeff, you tried to answer in 3 sentences or less, something they wouldn't have to scroll a lot to actually get the answer. And that is hard to do correctly and succinctly. For legal things that are very, very complex. And it is a skill, and it's something that you don't learn at all in law school. And even law firms, you don't necessarily learn. So if you could get a little bit of that sort of, contract 101, Barry Adler, do it in this many words, that's not a bad thing either.
Yeah, very important skill, because sometimes in my work as well, I get asked some questions by like maybe a sales team member. They're like, hey, can I do this? And then I'll send them a very nice paragraph telling them you could, but then this, but you could not, but then this. And then
all they want to hear is the yes.
Yeah. And then they just send me the question again, and they're like, so can I do it?
Good on them, though, for actually, following up and saying, can you please answer in a way I understand? And I do tell people in turn, like, if you don't feel I've answered or you have a follow-up, just ask me, just directly confront me, and I'll try to, like, give you a little more succinct. The temptation is to say yes, but and you can say that it's fine to say yes, but there are some caveats. I've written some below if you're interested.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and I think that's a mechanism by which you can say, yes, I answered the question succinctly for them, but I also provided the context, a little more context. I think that's an acceptable thing to answer it directly, but then say it is nuanced, but yes. And, the nuance is down below if you're interested.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I really think they should have like communication classes in law school
Yeah.
as well, because that would make my life so much easier. And I think just when you're getting out of law school, and just during law school, you're just so focused on the law itself. I don't even think I had any non-lawyer friends when I was going to law school. Like that was my universe. So I came out of it and I was like, oh, business, this exists. Although I studied business in my undergrad, just those 3 years of law school kind of made me forget
You
a
spend so
lot of.
much time, in the school, in the library, and all that. I think it's kind of natural that ends up being the case. But I would also say, like, to anybody who's in law school right now or going to law school, that it's usually associated with a bigger university, and there are usually your law school will often let you take classes in that bigger university to count towards your law school transcript and your graduation requirements. So for me, I took corporate finance. That was a class out of the MBA program for Stern, and I took a few other business related classes that the law school offered. But you can look around, and even if there's not that, interact with the business students, interact with the art students, with the at NYU, there was the ITAP program, the interactive technology program, that I got to know a few people in that program, and they were super interesting. What they were doing was really interesting, and it also pushed your mind as to what legal issues might relate to kind of these interesting art and technology things that they were doing over there. So take advantage of the fact that you're there and you're paying tuition to be at this institution, and you can get into those buildings and go to their meetings, go to their seminars, and learn something outside of law. If nothing else, just to get outside of the building and outside of the law library every now and then.
Yeah, yeah, just diversify your skill set, because I think like a law, the way it fits into the society, it's very, very useful to know something else
Yeah.
outside of law as
Yeah.
well.
Whenever somebody asks me, like, should I do pre-law before I go to law school? I'm like, no, please don't. I mean, unless you're just fascinated, that is your fascination in life. You care only about that, then yeah, go ahead. But if you have other interests, please, like, go do that other interest in college, get that other degree, and, like, become more of an expert in that area, and then bring that with you to law school and be, the person at law school who, knows music inside and out, and or the person who's an engineer, or the person who, in our case, I think one of my friends was PhD in biotech, and now he's a biotech CEO. So he leveraged the law in different ways. But yeah, go do that thing that you're super interested in, then bring that with you as an additional piece of background that you can leverage once you're an attorney. And again, back to the original, one of the earlier questions you asked, you can leverage to find creative solutions in law.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of diversifying your skill sets and like knowing other stuff, do you also think that having your tech background, does it make you more open to adopting more tech in your work, as compared to other lawyers who maybe don't?
I think that was probably the case maybe 20 years ago or 20 plus that I started, that I was probably a little more open to just using tech in general. I mean, at the time, like, I walked in law firms, people had flip phones, right? No, and there were still for document processing, you would mark up a document by hand, send it to the group that would then edit it and send back a physical copy. It was, and I was like, well, why can't I just type this? Right? I can just do this on my computer and make the changes. I don't need to, like, mark it up and send it to you. So I think I was predisposed because of the tech background, because I'd done a lot on computers already to do that. I think now everyone has grown up in the digital age. My daughter's 22. They've just grown up using computers and Google Docs and collaborating in documents and things like that. So I think most people going to law school now, coming out of law school now, probably are very, very comfortable with technology and moving seamlessly between apps and 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 all kinds of technology tools. So I think that sort of stereotype about attorneys is probably old and dated and not true anymore, at least of the attorneys in the past 10 years that have come out of school. Maybe for older groups, some people are still stuck in it with I actually used a dictaphone, which was the record like when you're doing diligence and send it to have somebody else transcribe it, which is just so weird because I can type as fast as I talk almost now, so it makes no sense. But we've moved beyond some of that, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think also the pandemic was a catalyst in integrating more tech into legal work now. So everyone is using Zoom now. It's normal. It wasn't as normal back in like maybe 2019 or early
Yeah.
2020.
Even within companies, it wasn't as normal. I remember at Amazon, I did a short stint where I had a big team, 30 attorneys or so working with me, and I took a kind of a break from that and I supported Amazon Go's Just Walk Out stores. And to do that, all the team was in Seattle, but I was in the Bay Area, and we started with the idea that I could do it from the Bay Area and we just do video conference. But at that time, 2014, no one really thought of it. Like no one really thought, hey, let's fire up the video conference. Somebody might not be in the room. And so, ultimately I ended up, commuting for 2 years back and forth to Seattle Sunday night through Thursday to support that team. I think now that wouldn't happen because everyone just naturally thinks like every meeting has one, because there might be somebody remote. Loop them in. There are ways to collaborate while you're in the conversation or in the meeting. Chats that are going on. The person in the meeting is looking and seeing. Is there a question being asked from the audience? What I've seen, and I really appreciate this, and I'm trying to learn from it, is there are lots of people who are very mindful about who in the meeting is talking and not talking, and they use the raise hand feature. And as attorneys, we're used to trying to get our point in, but I definitely try to restrain that and put my hand up like everyone else in those. But those are really, really super helpful, and the pandemic has definitely moved the work from home, work remote, and the ability to do that effectively forward just in leaps and bounds. If there's a sunny side to it, it's that coming out of it, I think people have found that you can be really effective remotely. You can use technology in ways that make you efficient, and in some cases, you might be more efficient because of it.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And for me personally, like some of the most important things are, what it means for also, women, women in leadership positions. You don't have to take as much time off. You can work from home if you want to. So that's been the most, that's been like the most inspirational part of this for me. And, so as a last question, Kevin, like you've covered a lot of, what like the potential pain points are in the companies that legal tech can address. I want to ask you a question along those lines. Often, as legal tech vendors, sometimes it can be difficult to communicate with lawyers because there's this like fear that, are you trying to replace me? Are you trying to like take part of my work away from me? What would be your advice or any insight that you want to share with legal tech vendors out there in communicating or selling to lawyers?
Yeah, I'm trying to count up really quickly on my hand the number of tech companies, the in-house companies I've worked for. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, now 7. I've never been in an in-house role in those 7 where I haven't had far more work to do than I could ever get to. And where I didn't feel as if an emergency or all the things that needed to get done pulled me away from the strategic things that if I could set back and think about for a little more time, and architect a solution for that, the company would be much better off. And it's hard with that cacophony of things that need to get done, but aren't as impactful, to find the right balance and, and triage it all and make sure that, like, because enough of that little stuff doesn't get done, it's a big problem. So and that's, I don't know of anyone in house that would tell you, I don't have enough to do. Or if you took away 25% of my work by helping me streamline this, then, maybe I wouldn't be as secure in my job. You don't hire attorneys in-house unless you have really have a need, like you're really going to save, you're really going to get some efficiencies for it in the first place. And so once you're there, the more I can do, with tools and everything, the more I can kind of magnify how much I can do and kind of put myself in 5 different spots at once, the better. And that makes, ideally, like if you do that, then it makes the roles even more interesting and more strategic and gives people a chance to really do things that have a higher impact. And so I don't think attorneys should be afraid at all of legal tech. I think that for maybe law firms a little bit, but not in-house. And I say that only law firms because if I don't have like 20 NDAs and 15, sales agreements and this that I can't get to that I then outsource because they just need to get done because now I have an internal tool, then maybe that's a little less work for the outside counsel to do. But it doesn't make sense to like have outside counsel do that type of work anyway. I would rather have a business person closer to the business who understands the product and all that, do those deals with the legal tool that we have to help them do the fallbacks and get the right approvals and all that, than I would send it to outside counsel in the first place. And, for those who haven't been in-house, whenever you send something to outside counsel or even to another attorney for that matter, there's a lot of work in pulling together all the information that person needs to be successful in doing that. And so maybe you save 1/3 of the amount of work that you would have otherwise, or maybe half of the work. In the best case, maybe 75%, but you're still 25% or more is still going to be your time spent both handing it off as well as like taking the output or the input from the outside counsel and tailoring that so that it speaks in the right voice for your internal clients. Because they're just not close enough to be able to know like how they should be tailoring particular advice for a particular person inside your company. So there's still work for you to do. So if you can, cut that out and just have it done internally using a tool, then that's also an efficiency gain for you. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not have, said it any better. Thank you so much, Kevin. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I learned so much from you, and I'm sure our listeners have really enjoyed this conversation as well. I really appreciated your very unique insights sort of at the intersection of law and technology and business. And thank you once again for doing this.
Happy to be here.
And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in every Thursday and for all your interest in what we're doing and in the legal tech world in general. We're here every Thursday right around this time, and we'll be here next week again. And thank you so much, and have a good rest of the day or good evening based on whichever part of the world you are in.